This week, Rod Simmons from Omada is with us to discuss the current state of identity related threats. Finally, in the enterprise security news, homomorphic encryption pops up again, some very diverse funding rounds. G-Core acquires one time Akamai Fastly Cloudflare challenger StackPath. Ever want to nuke your smartphone from Orgit? There's now a product for that. Microsoft Security Copilot has a release date, sudo for Windows. Microsegmentation pops up again. The TikTok ban, detection engineering, all that and more in this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Identity is at the core of every great digital experience. Ping Identity's solutions support the scale, flexibility, and resiliency required by enterprise-level IT teams for lasting digital transformation. With 99.99% uptime and over 3 billion identities under management, they're the only identity vendor that's proven to champion the scale, performance, and security of large enterprises. That's why Ping Identity champions your unique identity needs. They give you the tools to offer your users the right access at the right times, no matter how they connect with you. Visit securityweekly.com/Ping Identity to learn more. 2024 will be the year of cryptography, driven by compliance requirements like PCI DSS 4.0 and the long-awaited NIST-standardized post-quantum algorithms. No longer can enterprises take their cryptography for granted. Cipher Insights from Quantum Exchange brings clarity to cyber risk blind spots that other point-and-scan solutions miss. The continuous network monitoring and response tool flags, scores, and prioritizes dozens of crypto risk factors in near real time, displayed through a single user-friendly dashboard for efficient management and remediation. Empower your NOC and SOC teams with actionable intelligence. Demonstrate proof of strong encryption required for zero trust. Gain the visibility and crypto inventory needed to begin your quantum-safe journey. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/quantum exchange.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Pi Day. This is episode 353, recorded on Thursday, March 14th, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the mayor of microsegmentation, the captain of content, Katie Teitler-Santullo. How are you, Katie?
I am well. How are you on Pi Day?
I'm pretty good. How many digits of pi do you know?
Probably not that many. At one point, I had 12 or 14, but don't put me on the spot. It would be embarrassing. I'd rather eat pie.
All right. Fair enough. We'll move on. Yeah, the answer for me is not very many either. Also joining us is, for the first time, is the Dean of Detection, the Evolution of Enterprise Security Weekly, Darwin Salazar. How are you, Darwin?
No complaints. Excited to be back with the Security Weekly crew.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Darwin was actually interned at Security Weekly before getting into the industry, and he went out into the world, into the industry, got some industry experience, and yeah, we've brought him back on as a co-host. So good to see you, Darwin. All right, quick announcement, then we'll get into the interview. Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on our RSA Conference full conference pass for 2024. The RSA Conference will take place May 6th through May 9th in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC24 and use the code 54USecWeekly. 54USecWeekly, all together. We hope to see you there. All right, and for today's interview, we're going to be talking about identity governance and identity-related threats. We're excited to have Rod Simmons, VP of Product Strategy from Omada, with us today. For Omada, Rod provides vision for where the IGA market is going, and he works closely with the CTO and product teams to define this vision and objectives to achieve roadmap goals, I presume. Prior to Omada, Rod spent time at StealthBits, Beyond Trust, and Quest Software. Welcome, Rod.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you on. This is we don't talk about identity enough, which is interesting considering Security Weekly is owned by Cyber Risk Alliance, which also owns Identiverse, one of the big identity conferences out there. So when it comes around that time, they'll send over a list of all the talks going on at Identiverse, and I'll pick a few to have folks come on as guests. So maybe this will be like a a bit of a prequel to what people will be talking about this year at Identiverse.
I actually been lucky enough to go to Identiverse. I think it was in Colorado when I went. I don't know if it's there every
I
year,
think it's always in
but it
Colorado because
was
that's the only place I know of it happening.
okay. Yeah, I think it was. I was there 2 years ago. Fantastic conference, and it's also nice to have a conference that is heavily focused, I guess, on something that is near and dear to my heart. So, yeah, it was an awesome conference. If no one's ever attended, I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah, and to put everything in context, I was telling Darwin, identity is the largest category of cybersecurity products. If you don't count services, if you don't count consulting and MSSPs, by count, it is the largest category.
It is. I think it's the. I think it's the approach that that each organization or company takes is how they look at identity. But yeah, I mean, some people look at identity, they think of it as account. We look at it more holistically, as being an identity, i.e., being the individual person, and then you may be a collection of accounts within inside of an enterprise. But at the end of the day, all we're trying to do, and I think most organizations are trying to do, is protect users from attacks.
Yeah, and speaking of which, identity plays a lot into and I know a lot of attention goes to when breaches occur, threat actors. We learn their techniques and things like that. Maybe it's easy to forget that identity is always an option, and it's always a really good option. And attackers often take that route. Sometimes the latest vulnerability or exploit, gets talked about the most because there's only so much you can talk about targeting individuals just because it's easy. But that's why a lot of that tends to be the big focus. Like if we look at BEC scams, are the biggest direct source of direct losses in terms of breaches. If you look at the FBI's report, it's like 5 or 6 times bigger than ransomware. The amount of money that's stolen via BEC scams, and those are all focused on individuals and tricking them into wiring money different places.
Yeah, and but like, so for where we focus, and I 100% I align and I agree with what you're saying. Where we focus from an Amada standpoint is you pivot a little bit more into the enterprise. And when an organization is talking to us, I always say there's two key reasons and of why an organization wants to implement IGA or identity governance. The first is the governance part, and it usually is that an organization as a business has to demonstrate back to the market and also sometimes back to their customers that they have the right controls in place to properly protect the data that's been entrusted to them, not just by their employees, but also by their customers. And then if you look at the other side of that, it's usually that customers are coming to us because they want better orchestration and workflow management, essentially taking technology, mapping it to their business processes, and ensuring that they can get a high level of repeatability. But it is driven around an operational efficiency and a security initiative in that particular bucket or area.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a bit more about you've got a report out. And before I move on, yeah, I should mention Sam just let us know in the chat that Identiverse will be in Vegas this year at the Aria. So
Ah,
good to note there. Anybody who's interested in going, it's in Vegas this year. But yeah, moving to your report, Amada, is this an annual report that you put out every year?
yeah, yes, we do an annual report around identity.
Okay. Yeah. So the State of Identity Governance 2024, we do have the link in the show notes, so you can go check that out. Give us kind of the high level, like what kind of findings you're seeing from that, and are you focused? And what is the focus? State of can mean a lot of things, right? Like what do you focus on in these reports? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, there's a natural bias as any vendor is you're trying to understand where organizations are moving from a market perspective as it relates to identity governance. So what we are trying to understand is what are the drivers from an adoption standpoint? What are they seeing from managing identities internally? Like if you think back to where we were all dealing with COVID and working from home, it's that increase in work from home? It is, are they dealing with the challenges with M&A? Is it with application adoption? Like, what's driving the purchase? Are they looking for platforms that are more SaaS driven versus on-premise driven? Are they importantly focused on how they connect to applications within their enterprise? Or are they looking for AI, ML type capabilities to reduce the support and work burden for managing an operational governance with inside the organization? So the report is really just to understand from, not from our angle, but from the customer's angle, what's driving purchase decisions for them, what are the challenges they're looking at and identifying in the market, and more importantly, how Omada, and probably even from an industry standpoint, how vendors should be adapting based on the customer's movement and changes. While some of us are probably thinking, can't you get that from Gartner? It's often very good to hear the voice of the customer, because there's some nuances that you might hear with a customer that you may not hear from like a Gartner, Forrester, or Cupping or Cole report.
In terms of identity, can you clarify just a little bit? Because identity can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So, just maybe for our audience, could you clarify what kind of identity or identities you were surveying about?
Sure. And I always say that's a loaded question. So the typical, when we work with organizations, it's workforce identities. So if we talk to a customer, the first thing they want to talk about are workforce identities. So I have employees, I need you to manage those identities. Then it starts to span off. Well, we have contractors, we need you to manage those. And again, still within the workforce, but then it starts to expand off from there, which is, we call them technical identities, but it could be bots, it could be machine accounts, it could be a lot of other things that sort of make up with inside of an organization. So I say anything that has secrets that need to be managed, credentials, usually fold up some way under an identity. If you were a large enterprise and you had, let's say, people who needed access to hotel rooms, because I happen to be in a hotel right now, for cleaning purposes or just for moving around. Those are identities that organizations need to manage. I need to know who has the badge to get in that room. Those are identities that a hotel chain might want to manage. Or I was talking to an organization earlier today, and they actually help sponsor major events like the Super Bowl or like NCAA tournaments. And for them, it's like we have to staff a whole bunch of people, whether it be someone working concession, throwing popcorn to you while you're in the stands, or taking tickets at the gate. All of those are identities that enterprises need to manage.
Do you guys dig into non-human identities, so like cloud-based service accounts and things of that nature as well?
Absolutely. And I apologize, I glazed over that. We refer to them as technical identities, but yeah, bots are typically something that our organizations might be thinking about. They might be thinking about machine accounts, or they might be even looking at things that they're using for running cloud infrastructure as accounts that they want us to manage. Ultimately, we try to roll identity, like we look at it more holistically. So if I were to say, Darwin, hey, you're an identity, we're managing the system, your identity might be your Azure AD account. You might have a Workday, Workday account. You might have a SAP account, or sorry, SAP account, and you might have a host of accounts within an enterprise. And while we might be managing all those, they roll back up to who you are, Darwin, with inside the organization, as it's one identity we're managing, if you will, but it's a collection of who you really are and represented in the organization.
And in the report, you mentioned orphaned accounts and excessive permissions assigned to accounts. Of course, depending on the task to be completed by that user or that person, that changes over time. So, how do you deal with orphaned accounts, excessive permissions, and what are the different factors to consider? Every organization is different, so how can one think about tackling that big heavy problem?
Yeah, so there's a lot you asked for there. I could probably talk an hour about that, but let's try to keep it really brief. So when it comes to orphan accounts, it really is about ownership. So if I mean, most of us have probably worked in an enterprise at some point in time, probably in an IT department, and you realize that you look and you say, let's take service accounts, because you were talking about non-human related accounts. You have a service account running an operation, but who owns it? So eventually that application that you have in the organization goes away, but because you didn't assign an owner to that account, it just sits there. No one's really using it. So the first part of the application is to try to help, obviously, with discovery of accounts that you might have in your enterprise, and then linking those back up to the ownership. So I might have a business application. Let's use a SQL database, for example, or an Oracle database. I'd say Rod has ownership of that Oracle database, but he also has ownership of all of these accounts that are tied to that business application. So if the business application goes away and the accounts aren't being used, we know that we can contact Rod, or we can transfer the ownership if Rod leaves the organization, and we need to transfer that to Katie. She will take ownership of those accounts once Rod departs. So ownership is one of the most important elements as to helping out with orphaned accounts. And then for organizations, when they first start, we either try to identify all the accounts, assign if they're not assigned to human people, like i.e. my account, then we try to work with the organization to identify what's owning it, assign ownership of that to an individual person within inside of the company. As it relates to over access, over provisioned access, that's the heart of what identity governance is really focused around. It's focused around one, identifying the entitlements that people should get. We'll call them birthrights. So when you join an organization, you get these rights, and then as you evolve with inside the company, you might get some additional rights. So I think Darwin, they said that you were an intern when you first started here, so you got a certain amount of rights, but you didn't have everything, right? But then over time, as you started to do different projects, you might have to host some of these sessions by yourself. You had to get credentials for Zoom so you could host the sessions, handle the back end recordings, grab, like kind of content, whatever it might be. If your rights kind of evolve over time, an IGA solution would sort of handle the provisioning of that additional access, and then also the removal of that access when you no longer need those rights. So the key part is that you have a picture of what is good in the organization. Um, we call that a desired state. And then the ability to roll and always make sure that we can pull the user back to what is a desired state, and then a turn loop to make sure that access doesn't go too far is you have what's called a certification process. So where I would ask Darwin, Darwin, I would ask you, can you attest that Katie should still have this level of access? So we do it that way. So there's a lot of elements that actually go into this, and I know I talked longer than I probably should have, but that kind of gives you a general idea of what goes on there.
Yeah, good stuff. And I kind of want to transition over into you know, talking about AI. I know a lot of product managers, a lot of product strategy folks. When it became clear the kinds of things that ChatGPT could do, everybody kind of rewrote their roadmap, right? Was trying to figure out, okay, we got this new building block. How does it impact our product? What our customers are going to be expecting out of it? Is there anywhere we can actually, help things here with it? And I've seen in some places, I think it's overhyped. I was looking at Microsoft Copilot or Security
Hmm.
Copilot. They released the results of a study that they did there, and yeah, there's improvements on productivity, but it's not turning one engineer into a 10x engineer. It's like somebody's like 22% more efficient, and most of that is because it's summarizing text for them. The kind of stuff that we're already familiar that it's really good at. So how are you guys? I don't think I've talked to anybody from the identity space about this yet. So I'm really interested in what it looks like from your perspective, from Omada's perspective, and how you see it, helping, or maybe it's not that big of a deal for that space. But I imagine any space where you have a lot of data, and people want to query things like that, maybe it is potentially useful.
You're spot on. So it's funny when you said a lot of people when they saw GPT, they went rewrote their roadmaps. I was like, maybe GPT wrote it. Who knows? But yeah, when the approach we took, we looked at what in the governance space. One of the things really is that someone has to be accountable. We've talked to hundreds of customers to really understand how do we implement AI with inside the product that will be most beneficial for the customers. So often, where you want to implement it from a governance space or an IGA space is around the decision point for the user. What most people would naturally think the first thing you want to do is automate the decision. That is the last thing the customer actually wants. They're saying,
Right.
no, because I have to have someone who I can say accountable. If I granted you access to do transactions over $1 million, I need to have someone's neck that I can wring. If you violate
Mhm.
that why did they give you that access if you shouldn't have had that? So automation of that is not what our customers are looking
You need
for.
a blamable entity.
Absolutely. And saying the algorithm from Omada is what we want to blame is not what anybody wants. So when we talk to customers, what they said is they want decision assistance.
Right.
And what that really is, I think, a code word for most customers is we need this to try to help us make recommendations for us. We want to take baby steps. They do want to eventually get to some level of automation where it says, I'm going to make this decision on your behalf based upon historical knowledge, based upon what we should be doing in this situation. But there's a buffer period in between where the AI says, I'm going to make this decision, but it won't go into effect for 24 or 48 hours where a human can intervene and stop it from making that decision. So when I've talked to auditors at many organizations, the first thing they said is that they love the idea of us or IGA getting to the point of automation, but they'd like to start with recommendations. So leverage the data that we have to say, your peers are using this access, all your peers have this level of access, and walk through a decision chain that can help someone when they're making the decision set. They can say, 98% of the time when this access is requested, you actually approve it. You approve it for this reason. You always make sure that that access expires within 7 days of granting that access. And 100% of the people who you've granted that access to have used it for the 7 day duration, and no one has ever requested it again. It's very easy for me to look at that data and say, all right, I'm confident in the decision. I feel more confident because I didn't even know what was going on with those decisions. So we're starting first with, at least as it relates to that, is trying to do recommendations in line for business decision makers. The next element, and I think it's more traditional machine learning, but it's around role mining. It's trying to understand the access you have,
Mhm.
and I think that's where organizations still to this date struggle. Have you, if anybody here has ever implemented a role model, what we always know is that you create a role model, it's really good the day you implement it, and then the business continues to evolve. You make
Yeah.
acquisitions, you divest parts of
Exceptions.
your business. Yeah. And all of that. And then plus people just need access models change of, we have a new project going on here. It's going to last for 2 years and need new access patterns. So continuous role mining is another place where traditional machine learning kind of comes into play, but then generative AI gets to kind of lay over top of that to turn something that is super technical, like AI model or machine learning models, into something that a business owner will say, this doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know what this particular SAP group is.
Mm.
Because of the code names that IT people like to use for group naming to keep them unique. It's
Gotcha.
simplifying all that stuff. So
I
that's where
hadn't
the machine learning
considered
comes in.
that's huge. I hadn't really considered the ability of generative AI to translate text speak to like normal business speak, right?
It
Because it's really
is,
good at
yeah, it's a
translation.
huge challenge.
Yeah, whether it's different
Yeah,
languages
it's
or
fantastic.
yeah, interesting. Yeah,
And I think you hit a key point there. It also does different languages. So if you think,
right.
if I mean, I think everybody on this call are native English speakers. I'm making the assumption. If I'm wrong, I do apologize. But it is a struggle, like making sure that you can get good translations across many different languages. In AI, or at least generative AI, I think GPT, I think it's like 14 different language
Yeah,
translations out of the box. So I can interact with it using my native language. Immediately, it just responds to me in my native language. So it makes it a lot better for the end user, and also it gets the nuances that typical, translate this string text kind of misses on. So it definitely opens up a broad breadth of what you can do from an interactive standpoint. And I think you guys use Slack or Teams on the back end. It totally opens that up for the future.
yeah. I was head of product for a Brazilian company, and I was the only non-Brazilian there. So, and we the product had two languages. It had Brazilian and English. And when I got there, all the English was written by Brazilians, right? So some of it was fine, and then some of it had to be rewritten. So
Yeah.
I got to do all that work. But but yeah, it's really interesting. Another thing I thought of when you were talking about how you're thinking of using AI, what I think one of the biggest issues that I see is the beginning and end of account life cycles, right? Like making sure everybody's on the same page. When an account gets sunset everywhere. How big of a does AI have a use case there? And how concerned are you guys with that? How much do you play with that? Kind of overall life cycle process with
So
identities.
that's the heart of what we do, is
Oh, okay.
managing that governance life cycle from, I always say, birth within the side of an organization until someone departs. We call it, like in the industry, we call it join a mover leaver. You join the organization, you move around, then you eventually leave. But yeah, that's the nature of where we manage. AI and ML could probably provide some additional assistance, but typically that's handled through natural processes that exist in. I always liken it to, if you've done a consulting gig, you've joined an organization, and then for the first 2 weeks, you're sitting around while someone's trying to provision you access as you're billing them at thousands of dollars a day. It doesn't make the customer feel any good, and it frustrates you because you just want to get to work. And that's where identity governance tremendously comes in, is that day one, users can come in, their laptops are provisioned a week before, their managers have their passwords so that they can get up and get going, and be totally functional from the start. And knowing that when you tick in HR or in your contractor system that this person is no longer here, that whole deprovisioning process actually happens. And obviously, since we were mentioning non-human accounts, it's when you deprovision that access and for an application, when that application is no longer relevant to the organization, we have a person that we can send out a survey to and says, is this account still needed every 6 months? Once they start saying no longer, this is no longer needed, there can be a cleanup process that's initiated. So yeah, governance fits absolutely squarely into it, ensuring that joiner mover leaver cleanup process.
Yeah, and Rod, not necessarily a question, but a key point to highlight, that no matter how far we get with AI and ML, there will always need to be a human in the loop, whether to approve decisions, depending on obviously how impactful that decision will be. But when it comes to that example that you pointed out of, if I have to approve this transaction for $1 million, you're that'll never be fully automated, and what you're striving to do is equip your users with as much information and context as possible, to make the right decision. And so AI and Gen AI and role mining and things of that nature play a very powerful role in that. But I think it's key to highlight there's always this fear mongering that, whether it's with software engineering or security, that AI will replace humans and take all of our jobs. I think there will always be a need for a human in the loop.
So I agree with you on a lot of points except for one slightly. Until regulation catches up with technology, I don't think we can automate it all. I think there likely will come a point where regulation dictates that there are certain things, certain elements that can be automated, and it may eventually be $1 million transaction, which I don't foresee in the near future. But it will have to be that an accountable party can be an authorized or approved AI engine where you could go back and show the calculations on. But I do think we're definitely years away from regulation catching up on that.
And my next question is around, so personal and work accounts. It's always been interesting. Your report kind of talks to remote work continuing to grow, and it's always kind of a sticky situation. I see a lot of cases where um, companies have done a pretty good job at, ensuring everybody's just using work devices and work accounts with those devices. But especially like with Macs, for example, you're going to log into your iCloud account and things like that. um, they tend to get entangled. And I curious how you deal with that. Like if you just focus on the enterprise accounts, or if that's something you have to kind of keep an eye on as well. People using personal accounts alongside work accounts, or some cases where there just is no distinguishing. Like in a lot of cases, somebody's Gmail account is both their personal and work account, or their Apple account they use for both. They don't have separate.
Yeah. So, I, if you would have asked me this 5 years ago, I'd say it's been very separate. But you've probably seen like the concept of bring your own identity, that
Yeah.
concept coming up, and I think in Europe it's something that we're starting to see growing across Europe, which is that idea that I could work at one company one day and I brought my own identity there, and when I leave that company I bring my own identity to a new company. I'd say it's a bit more rare that we're dealing with that. It tends to be in specific European countries where the bring your own identity is important. What I do think where you actually identify is typically when you're dealing with the consumer, like your customers are coming in and you so in a banking type environment where you're managing identities for the customers coming in, less so the workers. And then the other element is that when you're providing services that are just kind of like it's a benefit. So many organizations might provide something like a one password, a last pass to their employees, but they don't want to own the vault. They're like, you can put it under your work account, but you can also just use it as your personal account, and when you leave the organization that vault goes with you. We don't want responsible, so that way you can
Right.
store work credentials in there, but you can also store personal, because we can deprovision the work credentials once you leave, but the personal credentials the organizations don't want to take ownership of. That's, I'd probably say, that use case of provisioning employees things like credential vaults that they can use while they're here and beyond is probably one of the most common places where we see that line blurring for managing those accounts.
Yeah, yeah, and that's an interesting point because one password, yeah, yeah, I've used it for a long time, and I pay for the family product. And
Me
when I
too.
went to a yeah, when I went to a company that used it at the corporate level, it joins your accounts. So all of a sudden that becomes all the same account, and it's a nice perk because now I don't have to pay for the family account anymore. Like that's paid for by my business account, and you can create separate vaults within one password to segregate that stuff out. Like I always try and put the name of the company in the entry so that when I leave the company, it's really easy to just do a search, select all, and just segregate all that out. But at that job, the one thing I really regretted was using my personal GitHub account uh, for work stuff at that company because that became really difficult to untangle. Like you'd think it'd all be
Yeah.
convenience, but like with some of these products out there, it can be really tricky to untangle stuff if you leave.
Yeah, I was a LastPass user for well over a decade until the security breach, and I switched to one password shortly after that. And I
Yeah.
struggled between one password, Bitwarden, and I knew that no matter what I have to change, I think for me it was like 600 passwords had to get changed, and it was just, I mean, Katie, I saw you say, yeah, you did it too. It's a nightmare
Yeah.
you go
Yeah.
through, but ripped the band-aid off, and I went over to one password, and I haven't looked back. It's been a fantastic experience over there.
Um, Anything else you want to highlight from the yeah, everybody's in our back channel coming out of the woodworks talking about what a nightmare having to move away from LastPass was. But
It,
or how
yeah.
terrifying it was. I think it's actually pretty easy, right? Like it's an export import and then you're pretty much done, right?
Yeah, as someone who's probably a little less technical than the other three of you on this call, I thought, oh God, here goes my Sunday. And it was simple. I could even talk my father through it via text. So, my 80-year-old father. So it was pretty good. And now I'm happy. And like you said, I have two vaults under one password, one for work, one for personal. Sometimes my personal stuff is like security magazines, online subscriptions. So I keep that in my name because if I ever leave the organization or am asked to leave or whatever, I still want the subscriptions to all those. But you open it up once and it's there and it's really easy. So it is a commingling of personal and work. I don't think we're ever going to get away from that. Not in my lifetime.
No, and for like I say, for me, the biggest challenge it wasn't the export, the import. It was now I have to go back and change all those passwords because I don't know if my vault was one of those
Right.
compromised. That was when you said it was a Sunday. I was like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Like it was.
Right.
I was in between calls, like saying, okay, I can change 20 passwords now, and then I don't know if you guys. Sorry, I know that I'm going down the one password route, but it's using that for your MFA as well, where you're saying it
Yep.
actually the MFA is
The
built in as
OTP.
like,
Hmm.
yeah, that is so it's well, and it's funny because you say it's like it is the one-time password. Yeah, it's built in. It's super cool, and now we're getting passphrases and all that great stuff. But you the question you asked is, was there anything else I wanted to kind of add on top? I think probably the one of the interesting things from the report, which I do recommend people just go and read the report. Some of them I always say are aha moments, or confirmation of what you've known. Like you look at it and you say, customers are concerned with identity threats. Duh.
Right.
And but there's also some stuff that is, I always say that reports like this, I don't always look at them to say, I'm going to learn something that I didn't know, but I am going to get confirmation that what I believed was factual is. And a couple, three key points that I'll probably highlight. One that you already talked about was the number three item that organizations are really focused on is generative AI. So while it might feel like a catchphrase when you're talking to companies, and I mean, every company I've talked to, generative AI is at the top of their list. I think it started at their CISOs, and they want to make sure that what can we do so that whatever products we're implementing with inside the enterprise can be more efficient than the next. So if you don't have generative AI, it kind of moves you down a stack from a business decision making, because it says your product will likely require more human input, human interaction, and it's not doing a lot of assistance to the end user. So that's the number three. If I had to look at what the number two item was, it's connectivity. The heart of what we do is being able to connect to your business applications. So if I
Right.
talk to a customer, they're more concerned with a connection framework than they are with, you have a support for SAP HANA, for example.
Mhm.
They're more interested in saying, for all the other applications I have that are not on your connectivity library, do you have a mechanism so that we can configure a connection to that without having to hire hundreds of developers? So that's probably the next key area, is that
Yeah.
we want to connect to our business applications, maybe ones that you may not be aware of, and we don't want to write code. And then the last and probably the most important, when we talk to customers, they want to make sure that can this mold to our business process. It's it's almost like we all use Word, we all use PowerPoint, Excel, or business applications. And I think of, like, if you think of doing a PowerPoint presentation, I use this app called Prezi. It's an amazing application, but you're not going to get everybody to create Prezi presentations. Most people are saying PowerPoint works, like it's a really easy software everybody understands. I drag and drop, and Prezi is more of an experience that you move people through if you're a high-end presenter and doing the same presentation over and over again. And what I'm really getting after that is that what companies say is that this is our business process. Your product has to mold to what we're doing, and that is the number one driver for organizations. Is they want to be able to say, this is how we do stuff. Can you ensure your product can meet the way we want to do it? Because we're not changing our process for the product. You're going to make sure your product can match the process. So those are probably the top other three things. I mean, I think it's already given that everybody's adopting SaaS, and they want SaaS driven solutions and making it turnkey. I think on-prem, I rarely talk to customers about on-prem deployments these days. It is 100% SaaS. It's amazing to see how quickly even this part of the industry is transitioned over to SaaS delivered.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've used Prezi also. It's a very cool tool, but you can only use it for certain scenarios, right? RSA
Yep.
sends you the PowerPoint template if you're speaking at RSA, right? Like you don't get an option with it. But yeah, it's a pretty neat presentation tool. Um, yeah, and I mean that drives so much stuff, right? Like we saw Mac start to come into the enterprise, and that drove a lot of software choices. Like if you look at MDM software, there's still this kind of gulf between good Windows support and good Mac support. That will drive your purchases. And I think this kind of dovetails into one of the other insights from your report, something that Katie and I have been talking about a lot in the last couple of weeks on the show, which is best of breed versus platform, which is one of your survey questions. And overwhelmingly, folks went for best of breed, which I found a little surprising because there are so many huge platform plays in the identity space.
Yeah. And I would say, well, on initial glance, it feels shocking. When I used to work in uh, the PAM market, so credential management,
Mhm.
people would say we had the same discussion: platform play or best of breed. And it's like, do you want to go with something that's marginally good at security or something that's really good at protecting your credentials? And we all want the best, which is typically like what we said, we moved from LastPass over to 1Password because we wanted to deal with something that we felt was going to be the best solution to protect our data. And that's for our customers. When we talk to them, what's most important for them is not necessarily saying, I want one vendor that can do a lot of things marginally good. I want vendors that can do this very well, but more importantly, can integrate within like an identity fabric framework or within my security framework. So whatever methodology they're adopting, I think when we talk to customers, the most important thing is it has to meld to our business process. We want to go with one of the best products or the best product that is offered inside the marketplace. We don't want to go with a vendor that kind of meets our use case, because typically customers that make those decisions, usually we're if we lost, let's say in one of those engagements, we're talking to them in 2 or 3 years when they just say it's just not working for us,
Mhm.
and it's costing us too much to try to maintain something that just can't be molded the way we need it. So best of breed, it's shocking, but like there are places where platforms really make good sense. So if you look at something like Microsoft, has their Entra ID and Entra permission management, all that stuff, it makes really good sense for when you're in the lower end of the market where the complexity requirements haven't started to come into play. But as you start to scale up 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 200,000 users, they've grown past the use cases that might come from an Okta or a Microsoft's offering, where they're saying Microsoft wanted to just say, here's turnkey, you do it this way, or you go and talk to another vendor. And a solution like Omada is heavily moldable and flexible to an organization's needs.
Yeah. Yeah, it
And
makes sense.
as you're talking about it, it makes more sense to me because you don't want your identity provider, especially if you're in a bundled situation or a quote suite platform play, you don't want that big company to make some sort of agreement or have some sort of restrictions on where you can go, because I imagine unbundling your identity from a larger platform is even worse than that day or 3 days that you and I went through with the migration for just our personal password vault. So it with your explanation, that makes sense to me. Yes, I want identity independence at least to a degree.
Yeah, I was looking at your connectivity library, and it's interesting all the stuff that you have to have in there, right? Like you mentioned SAP, and I can see why you've got 18 connectors just for SAP products. And we're talking about platform versus best of breed, but you've got connectors to all the big platforms that anybody would name off the top of their head too. Like there's so much interconnectivity in here, right? There's oftentimes it's not as simple as best of breeder platform. Like it ends up being this, especially if you're a heavy M&A, company doing a lot of acquisitions and stuff like that, you end up with a little bit of everything, right? So you need everything to play nice with each other.
Yeah, and it's also the vertical markets you're in as well. So if you were in a if you're in an educational market, it'll be important for you to have stuff like Blackboard.
Right.
If you're in a healthcare market, you'll need applications like Cerner. So what you find is that there's this broad sweeping applications that no matter what business space you're in, you're likely using one of them, like HR applications. But then you have to kind of be able to go vertical with organizations within those particular markets. And connectivity is super important, but it doesn't matter what vendor you are. You can be, a multi-billion-dollar vendor within this space, and you can't build every connector because some are homegrown applications that have,
Yeah.
REST or SCIM endpoints, and some are business applications. You're like, what is that called? I've never heard of that. It's
Yeah.
so nascent to an industry. You're like, we would never build a connector because you're net one customer that would do it, but our the configurability of the framework allows you to integrate that application without writing code. And I think that's where, if you if you've been in this industry, and at least I see gray hair at least on one other person on this call. I've shaved mine off, so you don't see mine. But if you've been in the industry long enough, one thing that we've all kind of come to identify is that the challenge with, like, as you kind of fold and roll these business applications in, is that again you're with them for a tremendously long time. And with IGA, the problem you ran into early on was, it was like you can do anything. You just have to have developers who will write the code and embed it in, and then upgrades became an utter nightmare within the IAM space. And this was back in 2000 to like 2010. And the modern platforms, as you move to the cloud, are saying we got to standardize this. We can't do what we used to do because it created a code management nightmare for our customers. It created supportability nightmare for our customers. It created pen testing nightmare for our customers, and they couldn't stay modern. They couldn't upgrade. And what we delivered with our SaaS platform was we gave customers that control so they can say, we're not ready. We're in a code freeze. So they had the control of feeling like they're on prem to say, we have a code freeze from here to here because it's the holiday time, or it might be important for our customer who's saying, the Super Bowl is our big event this year and we cannot make any changes, so they can pause that. But the nice thing is that they can, when they're ready to upgrade, they just click a button and go get a cup of coffee, and they're upgraded, and they're now on the new platform, and ready to go. And I think removing that quote upgrade process, while you still deal, when you give people that option of that quote control of saying, you just got to click the button. It's kind of like when you go into Google and they say, hey, we have a new experience in Gmail, and you say, oh yeah, I can go with that, and I can flip toggle back and forth. It's very
Right.
similar within our cloud platform, is that allows the customers to transition. But the challenge in an enterprise, as you can imagine, is that they still want to do their traditional processes, which is we got to test it in our test environment, pre-production, and then roll it to production. So they still try to manage some of that stuff in a very traditional way, but it's just they just don't have a lot of the complexity from going from upgrading. And the cool stat, and just which you may be interested in, we actually released our latest update yesterday, and I think as of today, when I checked this morning, we were already at like 47% of our customers have already done the update. And by the end of next week, we will probably be pushing over 90% of our customers have already accepted the update.
Wow.
And usually within a 3 week time window, we're at 100% of our customers have fully gone on the latest platform. And that is just amazing capability, even when you give that customer the control of it.
Yeah, and that's one of the other interesting things in your report is you on your survey you compare how people feel about different threats based on if they're using legacy IGA stuff or modern, and that's it's really interesting seeing the differences between the two groups.
Yeah, and it's, I think with legacy, it's often because their software is out of date. When I talk to, and again, it doesn't matter what vendor you talk to. Every
Yeah,
vendor will
and it's
say
not
we
SaaS, right?
migrate.
Like I imagine most of the legacy stuff is not SaaS, right? It's on prem stuff.
Legacy stuff tends to be on, is 100% on-prem. It's often not SaaS. You do have some vendors who will call it SaaS, when in fact it's just a managed service. They're taking their legacy
Right.
product, shoving it into the cloud, and providing it as a
Yeah,
hosted
yeah,
service. That is
co-locate. Yeah.
fundamentally different.
Yeah. Yeah, like exchange hosting or something like that. Like it's still exchange. It's just
You got it.
you've moved the headache somewhere else. You haven't taken care of it totally. All right, good stuff.
Correct.
A lot of really interesting stuff in this report, Rod. We appreciate you coming on and schooling us on all things identity. I think we covered a lot of ground here, and I had a lot of fun doing it. But thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
I appreciate you all having me here, and I have already subscribed and added you guys to my pod feeds. This is my podcatcher, so this is awesome to be able to have a new show to listen to weekly.
Great, great, good stuff. Glad to have you. And stay tuned. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.